Welcome back to our channel. This is a WISE validation report on the Rapid Transit System 1970 Plymouth Cuda. This had a special order number that was applied, M00104, and we'll see in a moment it was either job 172, 173, or a combination there of both. We found tags inside the vehicle of what this job assignment was because it was an early production vehicle. It was created by Chuck Miller of Miller Styling Customs from a design by Ed Bradley, who designed some of the early Hot Wheel vehicles. And hence the Hot Wheel logo and the style line. Again, 101-page report, and we went through every aspect of this vehicle, and we will explore that in a second. But I want to start off and really give some recognition to Chuck Miller. He's a gem of a person. I visited with him for, countless hours, going through his collection, going through his accomplishments, going through every inch of the car. Definitely one of the world-renowned craftsmen. Has been in this game a long time. These are some of the iconic vehicles that he's created: the Zinger models, the fire truck, the Red Baron, and of course, all of us have a Hot Wheels Red Baron. What I want to point out on the Zingers, if you look at by scale, there's a lady standing there. You can see its size. It's a standard engine. And then if you look at the size of the Zinger that was created, it's just exceptional. Chuck has been in and around the Detroit area. Actually, he's been all over the United States, but born and raised in Detroit. From Detroit, there is the fire truck, the Red Baron, the Zinger, the Sonic Cuda. All of these creations he has been involved with. It was an honor to meet him and know him and go through his great designs and his accomplishments, and spent hours in his design studio and fabrication shop in Michigan. There's not enough good things you can say about Chuck Miller. If you ever met him, you know exactly what I mean. So certainly the design of this vehicle was done by Ed Bradley, who's designed some of the early Hot Wheel vehicles. And so this is his rendering of what the vehicle should look like. And Chuck nailed it. So here is the back view, the nose of the vehicle. This was actually on display in a Chrysler display back in the early 70s. This was another color. The color was changed. There was two different color schemes that were put on the car. This is how it sits today, even though this is from, I believe 1971 that photo was taken. So those who are not familiar with the Rapid Transit caravan cars, there was basically four vehicles. The 1970 Cuda that we're talking about, a Duster, and two Roadrunners. And there is one person that owns two of these. The other person owns the other one, and someone will shortly own this Rapid Transit car that will be sold at an upcoming Mecum auction. So as you look at one of our reports, we certainly go through all the facts and features of the vehicle. Special order created by Chuck Miller. Numbers matching engine trans, customized body, 967 miles. We go through a checklist of all the features of the vehicle, any discoveries that are made. We go through the provenance of the vehicle. And this is actually a shot that was in Chuck's building as far as what the front end of the vehicle looks like, which is, as you can see, obviously it's identical to that. And it is identical to the creation by Ed Bradley. So when we're going through the vehicle, we look at a variety of parts and pieces throughout the entire car. We look for VIN numbers, VIN tags throughout the body. We look at dial-out stamp numbers. We look at the numbers stamped on the radiator core support. So something interesting that I want to point out here is if you look at the tag, how the tag was configured, it's a very unique looking tag. You don't see them typically configured like this in production. but this is BS23V9E100005. And again, keep in mind, we'll show you something in a minute. This is job early prototype 802, built in Los Angeles. And what's unique about that is typically vehicles like this, used for show purposes, are typically, they come out of, Michigan, predominantly Hamtramck. They could come out of Clairpoint, which was just down the street from the Hamtramck assembly plant. So it's one of the two. If you look at the trim tag is BS23VOE. And if you remember, the trim tag says V9E. So certainly early production, there probably wasn't effective coordination as far as what that number was going to be. But certainly the VIN tag takes precedence, and that's what it is, VINed as a 1970. So we went through the transmission, the stampings, the engine, the stampings, production date. Interesting enough, this is certainly has the OE1005 stamped on it. It says 440, assembled 527. There is no E or F in this. Casting date 513. So as we're talking about the dates, what we've done is gone through every aspect of this vehicle. We picked up the SPD date, hood safety, hood relay, carbs, transmission, etc., trunk mat, engine, radio, down through all the items. Identified any comments, any dates that were important. Something interesting I want to point out is, and which we stress often, is the die lot stamp numbers. So these die lot stamp numbers on this vehicle, because it was a newly designed vehicle, were all extremely low, all zeros. Many of them were zeros. There was some floor pan 19, trunk bracket 0, hood hinges, EMF 14. But interesting enough, if you look at the SPD August 2nd, so if you look at how these dates are falling in line with the build. Now certainly there's a date range of approximately 120 days, but if you look at everything, for the most part, is between March and July. One of the outliers on this is August 4th is the alternator. So certainly that, came in right at assembly. So being an August 4th date tells me that this SPD was August 2nd. That was the scheduled production date. So it was probably, obviously some date after August 4th that this vehicle was assembled, unless they had a problem with the alternator, grabbed another one, and replaced it with an August 4th date one. So we're talking about the 172, 173. So when we was going through the vehicle, there was a number of tags that were in kick panels, under the seat, under the carpet that were discovered that had job number 173, 172, 173. So these were typically identified as early prototype jobs. So they were assembling them, marshaling up the parts. And, any early prototype cars, early production cars, possibly where there was no VIN assigned, they assign it a job number and assign the VIN afterwards. So a couple of notable features on this vehicle, interesting to look at. This is the first time I've ever seen a stamp, an inspector stamp, like you typically see in a Los Angeles built car, right on the edge, back edge of the valve cover. Original hoses are still on the vehicle. Coil. Something I want to note is if you look at the noise suppressor, this is a typical 1969 noise suppressor. So this was on a 1970 vehicle. So, that's what they were putting on at the final assembly plant. Of course, the coil noise suppressor would not come on from the engine plant. That is all part of components that are put on at the engine dress. The tall nuts, the proper identification, ferrule that's on the wire. So if you even look a little more detailed, some items here. Made in USA, cap, red cap and ignition coil. There's the Made in USA. The identification tag on the distributor. Front case casting of the alternator date. Something else that's actually notable is when you look at the fuel pump, you look at the vapor separator, just everything about this, you know, it's never been apart. So interesting enough, I'm not sure why there's not a clamp here. Maybe this clamp came off during somebody was priming it as it sat, who knows. As you can see, fuel pump is painted, not a lot of paint on it, not overly painted, but it is painted. You can see the spark plug holder is not painted. Certainly the Corbin clamps are on the lines. And we were talking about the shaker. Shaker assembly had an electric motor. This is the box mounted here. There was a bracket that was mounted on the right-hand inner fender. This is the motor. The motor was connected to the shaker, and certainly upon actuation, that would provide some visual that the shaker was shaking. Carb air cable. It was certainly functional. You could see it was the Teleflex cable. You can see that as clear as a bell because it's only a 900 and some odd mile vehicle. The interesting thing I'd like to point out, there's several interesting features of this vehicle, sorry. But if you look at that's where the motor was mounted for the shaker. That is the shaker hole. What's very obvious is where the shaker hole is located. Now, interesting enough, this was probably configured maybe as not a shaker car, and they decided to make it a shaker car. But when I scaled the shaker hole, pretty darn close to the original size. And interesting enough, based on the edge of the shaker, it is clear this vehicle was painted red initially, and there is a raw edge right on the inside here. So that's clearly evident that this hole was cut in after the vehicle was painted and not before. That leading edge, no paint on it. So I hope you enjoyed hearing about this great vehicle. You know, and we owe a great debt of gratitude to Chuck Miller, who was the creation of this great vehicle. If you love content of this sort, please subscribe to our page. We'll continue with other segments on vehicles such as this. Reach out to us with any comments. Share with your friend. Thank you very much for viewing, and we'll see you during another segment of Mopar Vehicles.